Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
Competency mapping may sound like a job for cartographers, but in the world of performance management, it's a vital tool for navigating the often choppy waters of employee development. Competency mapping sets the foundation for effective performance management by identifying the skills, knowledge, and behavior required for success in a particular role. Without this map, organizations may find themselves lost in a labyrinth of mediocre performance, struggling to distinguish between average and exceptional employees. Thus, it is imperative to have a meaningful dialogue on this topic, since understanding competency mapping can help leaders make informed decisions about talent management, career development, and succession planning, among other critical areas. So in this episode, let's take a journey into analyzing the role of competency mapping in the area of performance management. Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Vantage Influencers podcast, where we explore a wide range of HR topics that are sure to grab your attention and inspire you. I'm your host, Sanjeevani Saikia, and today we will be having a conversation on the role of competency mapping in performance management. And for the same, I have with me Suman Rudra, Chief Talent Officer, Chief Human Resource Officer at Sagar Associates. Hi, Suman.
Yeah, hi. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Sanjeevani. Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, wonderful. First of all, I would like to wholeheartedly thank you for giving your invaluable time and joining us in today's episode.
Sure.
Before we dive deeper into today's topic, competency mapping, could you kindly walk us through your corporate journey so far?
Sure, Sanjeevani. So I had around 2 decades plus of HR experience. I was lucky to have exposure in different kinds of organizations, be it technology, be it manufacturing, be it services. Okay, and I had also been fortunate enough to got opportunity to work both in India and abroad, in US and in parts of Europe and also in Asia Pac. So I would say a pretty kind of a well-rounded HR career with global exposure, and I would say that at this point of time, I think the kind of taking up the responsibility of a CHRO of a premier law firm definitely is an icing on the cake.
Yeah.
So I think pretty satisfied with the journey.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. It has truly been remarkable. So with that context in mind, we can now dive straight into the topic.
Sure.
In this episode, since we'll be discussing competency mapping, so for the benefit of our listeners who may not be familiar with the term, could you explain what is competency mapping? Also, could you throw some light on how does it differ from job analysis in the context of performance management?
Sure. So competency mapping, Sanjeevani, is a kind of one of the key HR fundamentals, for an HR organization to have. And I think it's a mix of both the knowledge required to do the job, the skills, and the attitude. So it's almost like a 360-degree perspective of what is needed in the role to be successful, both from the foundational or the functional skills and also from the behavioral aspect. So why it is what is different from the job analysis is basically from the point that job analysis is more focused on the core skills or the task that needs to be completed in a job, for that job to be successful, or for that role to be successful or to give a result.
Yes.
It's not a broad-based term like the way competency is. So overall, I would say competency kind of enhances, or it encompasses the job analysis also part of it, but it's more broader in application, and it also takes care of other things which job analysis may not.
Okay. In today's rapidly evolving business landscape, organizations need to ensure that their employees have the necessary skills and knowledge to adapt to new challenges and opportunities.
Sure.
As you may agree, competency mapping has emerged as a valuable tool for identifying skill gaps. However, it would be great to know more elaborately from you on how can competency mapping help organizations identify those skill gaps and foster targeted training and development programs. So what's your take on that, Suman?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sanjeevni, and I think that's very relevant in today's time because things are changing so fast.
Yes.
The impact of technology is so dynamic that sometimes we feel that we are always quite a few steps behind.
Yes.
At the rate of the change. So I think the way this competency mapping helps is that one, that the competency mapping process should be kind of renewed over a period of at least 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that once it is done, it's done forever.
Yeah.
So when it is refreshed at a period of say 3 years or even 2 years, maybe in faster growing organization, it gives us a view of what is the need of the hour with respect to the training requirements at an organization level.
Yes.
Because suppose we do competency mapping for say 20 important roles in a company, then we come to know about all the necessary the skills which are needed, both behavioral and functional. And when we kind of do an analysis of the data that we get out of competency mapping, then we can know that at an org level, which are the competency which requires more attention from the point of development. So that data is very useful to create training programs at an org level, okay, which would be beneficial to the maximum number of employees.
Yeah.
So hence, and this process is very much kind of, I would say, closely linked with the development plan of the learning and the development plan of the organization. And it also helps to kind of create programs at an org level, which otherwise sometimes is very difficult to figure out.
Yeah. So reanalyzing the competency mapping plan every 3 years is a good way to go forward. So that's something that you have highlighted here. So great.
Yeah.
I believe competency mapping is a complex process and that requires significant time and resources to implement. While it can be an effective tool for identifying and developing employee capabilities, there may be some challenges that organizations may face during the implementation phase. And I also believe that identifying those challenges in the first place is important to implement this mapping system better. So Suman, in your experience, could you share some of the challenges that organizations face when implementing a competency mapping system?
Yeah, I think Jeevani, a very apt question. And I think the competency mapping process, itself is a very time-consuming process.
Yes.
Okay. And I think the most important part of the competency mapping process is to, get the time of the key role holders, because there has to be an extensive interview done with them.
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe for one particular role, minimum 3 people needs to be interviewed, 3 to 4. Okay, and all these 3 to 4 typically should be people who are linked to the role in some way or the other. So one may be the role holder, 1 or 2 may be the role holder, 1 may be the manager, okay, and 1 may be the level 2 manager. So getting the time of people to do competency mapping discussions is the most, I would say, challenging. And as I said, suppose, for example, for one role, you need to interview 4 people. And typically, if you have in your organization, maybe around 15 to 20 roles, so multiply that by 4. So you have to interview around 150 people. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important part. And the second part is, how how to kind of capture the information that is being told,
Yes.
So I think that also needs a little bit of skill, because the data doesn't come from the person being interviewed very, I would say, promptly. So there has to be the art of asking the right questions, so that the person feels comfortable in answering.
Absolutely.
And it's also the capability of the interviewer to kind of note the key behavior, which makes the person successful, because there may be many stories which are said, but I think keeping all those stories and evidences separate, just to kind of pick out the key behavioral trait which the person is wanting to highlight, and kind of trying to find, I would say the similar kind of a thread as he's interviewing different people on the same role.
Yes.
So I think a lot of challenge, or I would say a lot of the output of such exercise depends on the skill of the competency interviewer, and being able to kind of connect the dots as he's interviewing different people for the same role.
True. Suman, I think you would agree that a competency mapping system can have significant implications for employees' career development and opportunities. While this process can be beneficial for employees and the organization, it is important to consider the potential ethical implications of the system. So it would be great if you could let us know what are some of the potential ethical considerations that organizations should take into account while implementing a competency mapping system.
Okay, so I think one of the key things while doing this mapping is for the organization to kind of communicate very clearly to I would say to the right audience, maybe a certain level of managers and things like that, and above that, why this exercise is being done. Okay, because if it is not communicated transparently, people will definitely come to know there is some exercise which is happening, and they may not be aware of the objective of the exercise, and there may be some rumors floating around that. So I think one of the key ethical things to do is to kind of send a communication to certain level of managers and above, for them to know that this exercise is being done, and this objective of this exercise is to ensure that the organization stays competitive, organization stays right up there with respect to the new skills and capabilities which is needed. And I think to kind of fairly lay out the objectives for this exercise, so that people are fair and confident, in that this exercise is is kind of aligned for what reasons. The second is to kind of win the confidence of the interviewers, because I think when somebody would come and ask a question about what kind of makes you successful, and what are the pitfalls, what are your failures, etc. So some of those questions may definitely make the person a little bit uncomfortable, and they may feel that why such questions are being asked.
Yes.
Also, some of these people might be role holders who have stayed in the company for long, or they may be high performers. So I think it is also important for the organization to kind of ensure that there is a comfort feel in which this process is happening, and typically hence this process is almost well done through an external consultant, to which I think the people may be more free and frank and open up and share the data and information in a much relaxed manner than somebody internal. Okay, so I think these are the two important factors which I think should be considered: the overall objective and the interview environment, so that the person is able to kind of share the free and frank feedback.
Yes, absolutely. Needless to say that organizations have to keep these ethical considerations in mind while fostering a competency mapping system. So, very satisfied with your take. So far, we have covered the meaning of competency mapping, the likely challenges, and the significant ethical considerations. And I've received some really interesting perspectives from you. Hence, it's the best time to ask you, how can organizations ensure that the competency mapping system is aligned with their overall business strategy?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's, again, as I said, very, very a relevant question, because competency mapping is basically something which is done to keep the business moving
Yes.
ahead of the competition. Okay, so this is not, I would say, this should not be taken as a HR work, okay, or HR strategy. I think this is a part of the organization development exercise in which the objective is to ensure that if there's a business strategy which basically may mean that the company is moving into new markets, company is moving into new products or new service lines, okay, or there's going to be a challenge in the external environment that we have to face. So all these, the key part of the organization strategy should be enlisted before the exercise, so that when that exercise is happening, the business strategy or the key aspect of business strategy is kept in view while the questions are being asked. Okay, because typically this competency mapping is very, very essential for people who are at top management and who are making key decisions of the company, people who are key role holders. So the objective of competency mapping is also futuristic. I think one of the things you earlier said was, what is the difference between job and competency? Yes. So job is current, and competency is future. Okay, current and future both.
Yes.
Okay, so hence those questions needs to be asked that, okay, if today the person might be doing X, Y, Z, okay, to be successful, but in tomorrow's time when the business strategy is so and so, the environment is so and so, what skills, knowledge, and attitude needs to be developed. So hence the futuristic part comes, and hence it is very, very closely linked with the business strategy. And to take advantage of competency mapping aligned to the business strategy is one of the best ways to implement it.
Yeah. So my key takeaway here would be competency mapping is not just the HR's concern, but should concern all the key decision makers. So yes.
Sure.
Yeah. So Suman, we are arriving at the end of today's episode. But before we let you go, there's one last thing that both our listeners and I would love to know your take on. So basically, in your opinion, what role do you think competency mapping will play in the future of performance management? Are you optimistic about this tool, or do you have any apprehensions regarding this? So what do you have to say?
Yeah, so Sanjeevani, the thing is, competency mapping has always been a part of the performance management process. Though part of the performance management deals with the goals, targets, that the person has to deliver year on year. But I think competency mapping provides, the long-term view or the potential of a person. Okay, so typically everyone is interested that, how far I can go, what are the different roles I can take, what is my future plan. So all these questions can only be answered through competency mapping, because we know through doing this process, we come to know that what is the current status of the person. And competency mapping, once the competency are mapped, I think they can be evaluated in many different ways. Okay, so it's not just managers evaluating, it can be evaluated through a structured programs called assessment center, or sometimes called development center, through different varieties of exercises. So the process is very scientific in assessing the competencies. It is not one person deciding what the competency of the person is. So it's almost like a kind of multi-tier feedback, is taken. Hence, the person would accept, the results of the competency exercise in a much, I would say, much open and acceptable manner, because it's not coming from one source; it's coming through a variety of structured exercise. And as I said, that it gives a fair indication of the person's capability to take future roles. Okay, and based on that, things like career planning, career development, a future role progressions, everything needs to be decided based on competency mapping, and I think that's the most fairest way to provide opportunities to people and be transparent and open to employees.
Yeah, true. So Suman, we have reached the end of today's podcast. Do you have any message for our listeners? Our listeners would be delighted to hear it from you. Also, our audience might want to stay in touch with you post this podcast. So it would be great if you could tell them how they can reach out to you.
Sure. So I think what I would like to say, Sanjeevani, at the end of this podcast on competency is that though I think in today's time, we keep on hearing about so many changes that is happening in our environment. But I think it is important to also stay kind of hook to to few things which are required to be done in the next immediate, maybe a span of 1 to 2 years or 3 years, because things do change, but there are certain part of the job and the role which remains constant. Okay.
Yes.
So sometimes in the frenzy of so many things which is happening in the external environment, we sometimes forget to focus on the current and the present and the immediate future. And I think the current and the present and immediate future would be focused on knowing about what role competency I am supposed to deliver, what are the role requirements, at what level I need to deliver at different competency, and then is to kind of ensure that someone gives the feedback about those competencies, so it can be taken from your manager, it can be also taken from your peers, and sometimes it can also be taken from subordinates, a part of your team. So if the exercise does not happen in an organization in a structured manner, I mean, you may create your own basic feedback form, and you may know that these are the few things that are needed to make the person successful, and you can take feedback in your own way, if it is not being formally, being measured in your organization. So I would like to kind of advise that. Yeah. So take feedback in a structured manner, so that you are able to take advantage of the feedback, analyze, and maybe then plan your own self-development. So I think that to also create a self-development plan or your own learning plan, one has to kind of follow a methodology. Yes. It's not what is coming today or what is hot today, following it, and after that, not going with the trend of today, but what is needed for you today.
Yes.
Okay, and to prepare you for tomorrow. That's most important. I think the second thing you said, how to stay connected. So I think my LinkedIn is there, so people can connect to me on my LinkedIn. So it's Suman Rudra, Suman Rudra. So you can type it, and then and I think we can stay connected. And I normally respond to whatever queries, etc. I get on LinkedIn. So that's, I think, the way to stay connected.
Wonderful. Suman, it's been a pleasure to have you as our guest today. Your insights and expertise have been invaluable, and we're very grateful for the time you have taken to share your knowledge with our listeners. So thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Suman.
Thank you, Sanjeevani. I really liked this podcast, and it was very, very relevant and a nice topic to talk. Would like to kind of stay connected and see how can I help your organization and do more past in future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Suman.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.